From tolls to blockades, the U.S. says it's blocking traffic through Iranian ports in the Strait of Hormuz. But Iran insists it controls who has access and on what terms. So who holds real leverage? The era of free navigation is under pressure, and the global trading system could be at risk. Could the Iran war reshape energy routes and challenge the dollar's dominance? And who pays the price? Well, now the U.S. is the one shutting the Strait of Hormuz, even as Donald Trump was calling for it to reopen just a few days earlier. The U.S. president said ships entering or leaving Iranian ports will be stopped by the American Navy after talks between Iran and Washington fell apart. The Navy will also target ships that were paying tolls to Tehran, which has restricted traffic in the waterway in response to U.S.-Israeli strikes. But this isn't just about a blockade. Iran is tightening its grip on the strait, demanding the right to impose tolls on ships passing through one of the world's most critical trade routes. The risk for the global economy is pretty clear: higher prices, rising inflation, and a hit to growth. The ripple effects go beyond energy and trade flows, challenging the dominance of the U.S. dollar in global trade. Ferdia Carr reports.
The announcement of ceasefire talks between the U.S. and Iran last week buoyed hopes that the closure of the narrow Strait of Hormuz would not be protracted. In a major reversal of those hopes, President Donald Trump announced the U.S. would be imposing its own blockade on the strait as talks in Islamabad faltered. From late April 13th, the U.S. Navy plans to prevent all ships entering or leaving Iranian ports only. That is, in part, a response to reports that Iran is charging tolls as high as $2 million for tankers to transit the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's blockade of the strait is already strangling Gulf shipments, which account for around 20% of global oil and gas supplies. Trump has accused Iran of reneging on its pledge to open the strait during ceasefire talks.
We've been very nice. We haven't ripped down too many bridges. We did one only because they broke their word, they broke their promise. And remember, their promise was that they were going to open the Hormuz Strait. They didn't do it. They lied.
A U.S. blockade on Iranian oil shipments will likely further increase energy prices and worsen knock-on effects on the global economy. Iran says it's been exporting around 1.5 million barrels per day despite the war. Most of that goes to China, who bought an estimated 80% of Iranian oil exports last year. Cutting Iranian oil shipments off will increase bidding pressure on alternate suppliers, pushing global prices even higher. On social media, Iran's parliament speaker warned Americans would soon be nostalgic for the already high $4 to $5 per gallon gas prices. Several countries are sounding the alarm that Iran would undermine the very principle of freedom of navigation by charging ships to pass the Strait of Hormuz. Shippers must weigh the risk of potentially triggering US and EU sanctions by paying money to the Iran Revolutionary Guards Corps, who control the strait and much of Iran's economy. Lloyd's List reports at least 2 ships have made payments to pass the strait in Chinese yuan. Analysts say that's part of a wider attempt to loosen the dominance of the US dollar in oil and gas trading. Iran has made control of the strait a key demand in ceasefire negotiations, a scenario that could allow it to continue its toll regime for the long term. The US says it won't accept that. As the two sides ratchet up pressure for control of the waterway, the uncertain security situation in the Gulf means more volatility for energy markets. Ferdia Carr, Al Jazeera, for Counting the Cost.
Well, both Iran and the U.S. are being accused of violating the principle of freedom of navigation of their seas with their actions in the Gulf. It is codified in Article 87 of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, though the principle is much older than that. It says civilian vessels from any sovereign nation cannot be impeded by another in international waters. Now, it doesn't apply to man-made waterways, most notably Egypt's Suez Canal and the Panama Canal, which generate billions in revenue each year. But there have been exceptions made for some international waterways. For example, under a 1936 convention, Turkey charges a tonnage fee for passage to the Black Sea. But that's to cover operational costs, not to generate revenue. To discuss this further, we're joined by our panel of experts. From Canberra, we're joined by Donald Rothwell, a professor of international law at the Australian National University, with a focus on the law of the sea. In Edinburgh, we're joined by Frederick Schneider, an economist and a non-resident senior fellow at the Middle East Council on Global Affairs. And in London, Neil Shearing. He is the group chief economist at Capital Economics and an associate fellow at the Global Economy and Finance program at Chatham House. Thank you all for being on the program here. Donald, we'll start with you. I wonder, do you think this U.S. blockade of the Strait will be effective? And maybe more importantly, is it legal under international law?
Well, in terms of effectiveness, we really just need to see how that plays out over the course of the next few days. There are reports that we're receiving at the moment that some vessels have been passing through the strait, but the really key aspect of the blockade is, of course, to blockade vessels moving in and out of Iranian ports. In terms of the legality, there's really no question that, yes, this is a legitimate way in which the United States can seek to use and utilize the laws of naval warfare. Blockade is a well-established and understood principle that has been applied for many centuries and is currently reflected in international law. And of course, the United States and Iran are belligerents in this conflict, so the United States can legitimately engage in an act of blockade.
Okay, Frederick, the price of Brent crude has gone up 50% since this conflict began. Now that this U.S. blockade is in place, how much worse could things get?
Well, it's very difficult to say because the situation changes from day to day. Right now, we're in this stage where we don't know whether the blockade will hold. We've seen from the U.S. administration many different signals, and we've seen the oil price react accordingly. So it's been hovering around $100, but it's been quite a roller coaster. You've heard Trump say, we will invade Khark Island, we will bomb the Iranian oil terminals, we will open up the strait with the finest navy in the world, we will be escorting ships, we will demine the strait. Then all of a sudden it's, allies, if you want your oil, you have to get it on your own. And then the other day we had this tweet, open up the effing strait, you crazy bastards. And now we're at this blockade stage. So it's really difficult to see where this is going. I think one thing is quite clear. This is probably not going to last very long because, it's unclear whether the US will follow through with it, given the many changes in policy. B, China has already signaled that they're not very happy with the blockade because most of the oil that is being blocked is destined for China. And we've heard, I think the Minister of Defense said that the US should not meddle in Chinese affairs. So I don't think they will take that lightly. So it's a very volatile situation, and I don't think it will last very long in either direction. And there's a good potential for escalation. There's also a lot of effort to de-escalate, but we will have to see where this is going.
Yeah, and President Trump also believes that this is not going to last very long. I know this because he did an interview on Fox Business on Monday, and in that same interview, he was also asked about the price of oil and gas. And I want to play